Before we write more code, I'd like to talk about preprocessor directives. So preprocessor directives are these lines in the source code that begin with the pound or hashtag symbol. And the most common one that you'll see is the include directive. Now what's going to happen is that include line, that pound include line, will be replaced by the file that you reference. So for example, if you do pound include iostream, it's going to, or string, then it's going to replace that line with that file that you reference, so iostream or string, or your own files. And we'll look at a few examples shortly. So these are not program statements, these are not C++ statements. They are directives or instructions for the preprocessor. So what is the preprocessor? Well, the preprocessor you can think of as a program that will go in and examine or it preprocesses the code that you write, okay? So it takes that in, it examines or processes that, and it's going to look for these directives with, again, the pound or hashtag symbol, and it's going to resolve those before the compilation begins. So you can use the error directive, for example, to abort the compile with an error message, or for certain conditions, such as when you want to compile portions of your code based on whether you are Windows or Linux. So it's important to note here that the preprocessor program that we talked about here does not understand C++. It is going to resolve the directives or those instructions, again, using the pound or hashtag symbols, and basically gets the source code ready for compilation. It is the compiler that actually does understand C++ well enough to a point where it compiles that to a format that the computer understands, which is ones and zeros. And so a few examples. Again, you can include already existing code that someone else wrote, such as iostream, which stands for input-output stream. You have string and various other things. You can also include your own files. So as I mentioned, we'll talk about header files later. So you can include your own files, and you'll see that the difference here mainly is double quotes versus less than and greater than signs for the existing code, so string and iostream. To the right, you'll see these as well. You'll often see some of those, such as pound define to define macros, for example. You have error, you have pragma, so you'll see stuff like pragma once, and so on. Okay, you have a few conditionals as well, such as if, else, and so on. Okay, so let's write some code. We want to write something out to the console window. So I'll just click over here, press enter, then I'll do cout. Now this stands for console output. Now before we can use this, we need to include some files because this was written by someone else, okay? And of course we don't have the definition of this functionality in this code. So this means that we need to bring that definition into our code, and we can do that by bringing the entire file in. So I'll do pound or hashtag include iostream, like that. Okay, now you'll see cout is undefined, so console output is still undefined. So what we need to do here now is we need to prefix this with a namespace. So we'll talk about namespaces next, but for right now, I just kind of want to get something printed out to the screen. So what we'll do is std, and we'll do 2 colons, like that. Now you'll see that red squiggly line. So what I talked about before was this red squiggly line that you'll see under shout. And if you hover your mouse over that, you'll see it's undefined. So this is a great thing about Visual Studio. As you work, it's going to go through and check for errors. We have a bunch of errors, firstly because we don't have a semicolon at the end of the statement. As soon as we do, that return, squiggly line at return will go away. So sometimes it's not actually the line on which the red appears where the error is. It's often the case that the error is on the previous line. Okay, so just keep that in mind. But shout is currently undefined. That's because it is basically defined in a code block, a named code block that contains it. It's almost like in a folder, and that folder is the standard namespace. So we have to do std double colon, and then cout, and now that'll be fine. Then I'll do two less than, those less than symbols, and then I'll do in double quotes hello world, and I'll do another two of those less than signs, and I'll end that line off. So that is one statement. So I have two statements in here now, the return and this output. Okay, so it's very simple code here. I'll control F5 to run this, and you'll see in my window now we get hello world. Okay, so it prints this out to the console. I would like to note a few more things. I'll right click on here, and then I'll go to properties. So on the title bar here, I'll go properties. I can change the color, and you can change the font. So in this case, I want the font to be large so you can see actually what it is that I'm writing on my end. So I'm going to change it around a bit. You can change the font if you want. I just want to change the size. Click OK, and now you can see the font changes. And if you had a hard time seeing this before, maybe you can see it now. It says exited with code 0. Press any key to close this window. And here is the text that we printed out to the console. Similarly, you can do things like change the background color to white, maybe the text to something like black. Control F5 and run this again, and you'll see the text changes. Okay, so I'm not sure if I'm going to keep it like this. I'll probably revert this, but you can change it if you want. So I'll do the background black, text I'll do white. Close that off, run it again, and you'll see this is now white on black again, basically. I'm just going to close that off. Okay, so now we can move on and we can talk about namespaces and some of the other operators in here. So this console output is pronounced cout. So it's an object that has a member function called operator and then two of those less than characters. Now those two characters, even though it's two characters, it is considered one operator in C++. And it was defined previously, but here basically what this means, it is redefined to insert data into the output stream. And so it is called the insertion operator because it inserts data into the output stream. So don't worry too much about objects and what member functions are. We talked about functions before. Now a member function is basically a function that is kind of part of a class. Now we haven't discussed classes or anything yet. Don't worry about it too much at this point. We'll get back to classes and everything, and we'll explain overloading and all of that, and at which point this will make much more sense to you. Now we also use infix notation with a cout and then that insertion operator followed by hello, that string. Okay, so this uses infix notation instead of using a more complicated expression such as, calling that weird function. That would be tedious. So instead we use an infix notation. And this also allows it to be chained. So you can see, as we had it before, we have cout, then we have that insertion operator, we have a string, and then we have another insertion operator, and then we have endline. Now endline is something that is called a stream manipulator, and we'll discuss this in more detail later. But basically it ends the line off. It's similar to pressing enter at the end of the line in a Word document or some text document. If you do it multiple times, as you can expect, it's like pressing enter multiple times. You have another way of doing that, but we'll discuss that later. I would also like to reiterate that we will discuss this stuff in more detail as we go along. So I talked about classes, I talked about functions, member functions, overloading, a lot of stuff in here that might be a bit weird to you right now. I just want to show you that this stuff does not just work. Okay, there's a kind of a reason for it working, and it's implemented by a programmer, right? This functionality is implemented by someone else. We are simply reusing it. And as you become more experienced in C++, you'll be able to create, interesting functionality, overload stuff yourself for your own classes, create your own member functions and all of that stuff, including namespaces, which we'll talk about next.